Welcome to KVEX training on due process records. And what you see in front of you is the record review document itself. This is the standard we use for reviewing files. This is the standard that KDE uses when they come in and do an audit. And this is the definitive piece of foundation for information in regards to, recording in your files what needs to be recorded. So we're going to start out and we're going to look at a file with you. You're going to have that file in front of you. We're also going to take you through the record review and kind of go over the things that need to be found in your records, give you our impressions from all of our information in regards to caps and that kind of thing. So what you have in front of you right now is the demographic page, and I've annotated the document. And so the first thing you look for is you look for the current IP to complete the demographic information below. Put your name up there at the top, put the date, today's date, and then you're looking for current information. You're looking for the current IP, you're looking for the current ARC notice, you're looking for the current conference summary. And then you just fill that out in its entirety. It's important to know the exact age for a student in order to correctly review a file, especially when that student is in grade 8 or is age 14 for transition purposes. We also need to know when that student is age 16, because that kicks us into some things that we need to know as well. So I would remind everyone that when we're looking at these files, there's certain things that we want to look at. So we need to make sure that we're looking at the correct information. We've got the correct age, we've got the disability, and those types of things. And as you see, also then we want to mark what's being done. So we're looking at that last or that most current notice, and we're determining, is it an annual review? Is it a 3-year reevaluation? Is it a combination of those two? Is it an initial referral with eligibility being determined and an IEP being developed if eligible? And then also they give you the option of putting other there. And lots of times we'll go ahead and mark other, and we'll put transition if we're reviewing the file for those students that are in 8th grade and up. So just real important point. And you see down here, it says anything that's in bold on the record review is important. And so it says review the most current information from the student's record to document compliance. So we're looking at the last IP, we're looking at the last conference summary, and we're looking at the last IP, ARC notice, IP, conference summary. So if you notice the way it's kind of set up here, this says they give you some notes of things that you need to read and make part of your being as you're reviewing files. And you need to know those individuals included in the district's list of employees with legitimate educational interests under FERPA are not required to sign the record of access. So this is a document that you would have within your file. This is one of those things that when we review files, we say, hey, if you don't have it, let's get that thing in there, right? It's a computer generated form. It should be in there, and it should be signed by folks that are not an employee of the district. So if I come out, I need to be able to sign that. If someone else from KDE comes in, they're not an employee of the district, they need to sign that if they're reviewing the file. So that's the purpose of that. So what we typically do is we give you this. We give you yeses on this, and we make sure that that is in there with the correct SSID number and the student's name on that document so that we can give you credit for yeses here. It says, look, you're looking for, in bold, a record of access. And this has the name of the party seeking access, the date access was given, and the purpose for which the party is authorized to use the record. And so the form in Infinite Campus takes care of that, has all that information on there, and you fill it out that way. So enough about that form. We always make sure to add this document if it's missing and give you yes for all 3 items. So that's one that you're not going to get counted off on when we review files. As we move into the meat of what we're going to look at, the first thing we look at, as you see is up there, is the Notice of Admission and Release Committee, the ARC meeting, the last meeting that you held. So go to your folder and pull out the notice of admission release committee form. There's also an Infinite Campus contact log. This is a log that's intended to keep record of your contacts with your parents, and then also the conference summary. So we'll be looking at those things and comparing and contrasting what is actually there, what needs to be there, and hopefully you'll see some of the things that maybe you might need to just kind of shore up within your folder. And maybe not. Maybe you might have it all correct. We hope so. But there's some things that we need to look for here, and the relevant documents are in bold. Again, the notice of ARC and the conference summary and the campus contact log, Infinite Campus contact log with your parents. So the first one is when you're reviewing a file, the first thing you look at is the local education agency. That's your district. If it's Pike County, Pikeville Independent. If it's Breathitt County, if it's Wolf, if it's Pike, whatever. Provides a written invitation to the parents at least 7 calendar days before an ARC meeting. So out there in annotation in the red, I have on the notice of ARC, look to see that the date at the top of the form is dated 7 calendar days before the actual date of meeting. So there's two dates on that. There needs to be a 7 calendar day gap. If you there's some exceptions to this. And the record review document's pretty straightforward in that it says this also applies to initial ARC meetings for preschoolers transitioning from first steps. Now, there are some exceptions. You would mark NA if the parent requested or agreed to meet earlier. So there's a little box on your conference summary, and it says the parent agreed to meet earlier or requested to meet earlier. And you mark that box, and then that gives you the ability to not be counted off here, and we don't have to see a 7 calendar day gap. We can allow you to go ahead and have that without any citation in regards to being compliant. Now, so what you would do if you were reviewing a record, you would say NA right here on this, if the parent agreed to meet earlier. There's another note, if it's a meeting that's for a safety issue or a change in placement due to a violation of a code of student conduct. Sometimes those things have to happen in a 24-hour period. So you would get an NA on that if that was the type of meeting you were having, and you would mark on the conference summary, or I'm sorry, on the ARC notice, the purpose of that meeting and what the purpose of that meeting was for, and you got the other box to do that with. Then on number 5, there's documentation of the district's attempts to arrange a mutually agreed upon time and place. Only mark no here if the parent did not attend and the district did not document attempt to use an alternative means, more than one method or attempt. So it says if the parent does not attend or did not return the notice of admission or release committee with their intentions, and there's no documentation of multiple attempts, more than one method of attempt to contact the parent or emancipated student, mark no. The documentation record may include notes of phone calls, copies of correspondence sent to parents, or detailed records of visits to home or parent's place of employment. Only mark no here if the parent did not attend and the district did not document those attempts. Now, the law says that we do 3 notices, and make sure that you've got, if you don't have any correspondence back from that parent and you go ahead and have that meeting, that you have those 3 notices documented appropriately, and that you document that parent contact log as such. So what we say is always start that annual review meeting 21 days in advance. So that gives you 3 blocks of time with 7 calendar days where you can have the proper amount of notification. Now we and Brenda said this last time when we were meeting. She made mention of the fact that when we review files, lots of times we look and we will see that there's only 1 notice, and you go ahead and have the annual review, and the parent didn't show, the parent's not part of the process. If that's the case, then that's a non-compliance, because the record says you're supposed to do 3 notices, and you're supposed to document any contacts that you have through phone call, copies of correspondence you sent to the parent, or any detailed record of visits to the home, parent's place of employment. It does say you can mark NA if documentation showed the parent requested or agreed to meet earlier, or if the meeting is for disciplinary change in placement or a safety issue. So we're looking at that ARC notice, and we're looking at the whether or not there's a 7-day period, 7-day calendar gap there. And we're also looking if the parents are not responding, the parents did not attend. If the parents did not attend, we looked to that notice and we see if there is documentation from the district that they made multiple attempts to get the student's parents to the table for the meeting. So that's kind of straightforward there. Any questions? Please use the chat feature if you have questions. I think Dion will be monitoring the chat for us, and hopefully Brenda will be joining us soon, and we can get some of her input as well. So the purpose of the meeting, we're looking at the purpose of the meeting, and we're looking to see if we mark the correct purpose of the meeting. And most of the time, if that meeting matches that conference summary, because what happens when you elect the purpose of the meeting, it's supposed to transfer to your conference summary. So we just check that those subject verb agreements occur there. So we look at the ARC notice purpose, and we look to see if that translated over to the conference summary. Now, notice that 6B is bold. That is because 6B is a federal indicator. And 6B is one of those things that you can be cited for and get a desk review for when it comes to transition. For children who are in the 8th grade or 14 or older, the purpose of the meeting indicates that the ARC discussion of post-secondary needs, post-secondary services, or both. So we're looking for kids that are age 14 or in the 8th grade, that when we review the file that date, if they're age 14 or they're in the 8th grade, that you have indicated that transition is a purpose for that meeting. Then we look at the things like the time of the meeting. Was that indicated? Was the date of the meeting indicated? Was the location of the meeting indicated? And then we look to see that the roles of the participants attending the meeting match on the conference summary signature page, and that they match up with what the roles that you've invited. So we don't ever invite people. If you're looking at your notice right now, you're just going to have things like general education teacher, special education teacher, and you're going to have local education agency representative, things like that. You're going to have related service providers, speech, OT, PT, those kinds of things. So we're inviting roles, not people. And we're looking to see that those roles, once you've invited them, have they been fulfilled? And if they haven't, then is there an excusal or whatever? But, in order to have a properly constituted ARC, you have to have an LEA representative, a special education teacher, and a regular ed teacher at minimum. And then you try to get the parent, and then if you got related service personnel that's supposed to be there, then you make sure that they're there. So we're just looking for agreement between the notice and the conference summary on this particular piece. So on this page, relevant documents are the notice of admission release committee meeting form, the contact log again, the conference summary. Same thing that we were talking about on the previous page. And number 12 says that the notice that the parents may invite people with knowledge or special expertise of the child to the meeting. That's taken care of by the form. And so that form, that ARC notice has a written statement that allows the parent to know that they may invite people with knowledge or special expertise of the child to the meeting. Now, one of the things that we want you to note is that if a parent brings an attorney unannounced, you're supposed to, by law now, according to Teresa Combs and according to Brenda Combs, and I know they know their stuff. So if they bring an attorney without letting you know, you're supposed to go ahead and have that meeting, and then you can get your attorney involved after the meeting is over. You're not supposed to delay that meeting. In the old days, we used to delay that meeting if an attorney came. So just as a note there, keep that in mind. If you run into that, you cannot stop that meeting and not have that meeting and then you would have to do proper notification and let everyone know what was going on. The conventional wisdom is that you would go ahead and have that meeting now, and regardless of whether or not an attorney is present with the parent. So number 13, for children transitioning from First Steps, an invitation to the initial ARC meeting is sent to the First Steps service coordinator or other representatives of the Part C system if the parent requests. And we say must get consent to invite the outside agency representative before generation of this notice. And so what the whole part of that is that when you're doing preschool kids and you're transitioning from First Steps and they're getting ready to turn 3, an invitation to the initial ARC meeting is sent to the First Steps coordinator, and we've got highlighted in yellow if the parent requests. You must get a consent to invite an outside agency from that parent in order to invite that person. You have to have permission from the parent to invite that coordinator. So when that child becomes your child and you're having that initial meeting and you're going to plan the evaluation for that 3-year-old, you need to make sure that before you invite that First Steps coordinator, you have permission from the parent to invite grade 14 or older. The child is invited to the meeting. Reviewing files this morning, I ran across one where they forgot to invite the child. They didn't include the child. And the record says when they're age 14 or older, you must invite the child to the meeting, and you must include their preferences and interests. So we want to make sure that we're inviting that child age 14, and if they're in the 8th grade, we sometimes run into 8th graders that are 13. Doesn't happen very often, but sometimes we do. And so what we do when Brenda and I have come up with this, we train this to say, when that student's 13 and they're on our caseload, we want to take a look at those students really hard and see when their birthday is and when their next annual review is. And if they turn 14 before the next annual review date, we want to go ahead at 13 and include the ILP, the multi-year course of study, and the discussion in the conference summary and the invitation to the student. And then we do the same thing at age 15, 16. And I know I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but we do that because we don't want to miss anyone. The record says, and Katie will tell you, that when the student is 14, if we review that file, that student's 14, and you had an annual review when they were 13, and you've not had that new annual review for a 14-year-old, you're responsible for certain things when it comes to transition. So we just want to make sure you understand that as you're looking at your files today. All right, so now we're talking about ARC membership as we move on down. So we're looking again at who actually signed the conference summary report. See that in bold right there in the notes? We're looking at the conference summary report, and we're looking at the notice of admission or release committee. We're comparing the two documents. We're looking to see who was invited, and we're looking to see who signed. And there's some other notes up there, and we'll talk about those in just a second. But it's a good practice to confirm who the student representative is. When we talk about the word parent, who is the parent for this student? Who has the right to make education decisions? So it's always a good idea, especially with those newer students, transfer students, to determine the parent representative and do that form and make sure that we've got the right people making the right decisions and if they are legally able to do so. So when we're looking at the conference summary, we're looking at the signature page, and we are looking to see, first of all, did the parent attend? And did the parent sign the signature page? If the parent signed the signature page and it's in the record, we just kind of look at the conference summary minutes really quickly and see subject verb agreement again. Did the parent sign? If they did, this is an automatic yes on number 15. If they did not sign, in cases where the parent did not attend, documentation shows that all of the following occurred: that the parent got written notice of the meeting, that they received the ARC notice. So you would need, a signed ARC notice if they didn't attend. Parents were provided notification of the meeting through multiple means. Parents were offered alternative meeting time and location. Parents were given the opportunity for alternate means of participation, informal conference, phone or video conference, and you document that kind of thing. And then it comes down here to this last one, and we're looking at the parent signature page, or we're looking at the signature page on the conference summary, and we're looking to see if the parent didn't sign, but did the parent attend via alternate means? Well, you'd say, well, the parent attended, but here's the letter of the law. Due process requires that the parent receive the paperwork. The due process, the KAR said that they received the due process paperwork. So right here, we're looking to see, did you indicate by method and date if they did not attend, how they received the due process paperwork? We also include that via alternate means because they're not physically there. So it's a good idea to just cover yourself there and go ahead and indicate how you got it to them, because the record does say that they need to get that documentation, that due process documentation. And I see Miss Brenda. Hello, Brenda.
Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome. We're glad to have you on here. I was just getting, it was just making me nervous not to have you here with me. And I'm so happy that you're here, and sorry that you had trouble. And I'll make it up to you somehow if it was my fault. So anyway, Brenda has a wealth of knowledge. She's going to be interjecting throughout the day. She's going to be stopping me and correcting me and making me live right. So anyway, we can laugh a little bit now because we got everybody here. So that's wonderful. All right. So again, to circle the wagons, we just want to make sure that we got the proper people. We got the proper people signed in, and that we get that due process paperwork to the parents, and that we indicate that, and we document by method and date how we got that information to the parents. Okay. Then we look to see if there's a regular education teacher of the child to provide information about the general curriculum for the same age period. So the general ed teacher is the content specialist, or should be that curriculum specialist in the room, and they should inform and that's why we have them there. They can tell us what a similar age peer should look like, what's expected for that peer, and that we have a point of comparison for how our student that we're doing the IEP for is actually doing, and how that is compared to those folks within the record. So as we move on, I want to circle back up here, and it says duly certified personnel in grades K-12 may not serve in multiple roles. For example, a special ed teacher who is also certified in regular ed cannot serve as the special education teacher and the regular ed teacher. So, and then it points you to a hot link, OSEP's Guide to IEPs, and you can read more about that if you'd like, but you cannot serve a dual role. And we just make sure that we know that. So the regular ed teacher it can't be the regular ed teacher and the special ed teacher at the same time. So the same person can't fulfill those two roles in a properly constituted ARC. Now, when we get to special ed teacher, it tells us some things too. And so again, we're looking at the signature page, make sure that the invited roles match. And then we'll look at the notes here. A special ed teacher or a special ed teacher knowledgeable of the suspected disability. Now, let's say you have a meeting and the special ed teacher gets called away. All right. Can another special ed teacher who has knowledge of the suspected disability fill in for that other special ed teacher on that staff? Absolutely. So again, we're inviting roles. We're not inviting people. So it's perfectly okay if, we have someone, a special ed teacher needs to be called away for an emergency. Another special ed teacher at that school can fill in, and then it also says if the student receives only speech language services, the speech language pathologist served as a special education teacher. We run into this sometimes when we review files where the speech teacher still signs as the speech teacher. If they sign as a speech teacher, they're a related service. For these kids that stand alone and have speech only, the speech language pathologist signs as the special education teacher, per the note here on the record review document. The preschool teacher may serve as regular and special ed teacher if the preschool teacher is IECE or interdisciplinary early childhood education certified. So this is the case where the preschool teacher may serve both roles. If they are, and they have to be IEC certified and sign the document as such to indicate that they are IECE certified. So just look at your signature page and see that you've got a properly constituted ARC. Compare that signature page back to the invited roles on the ARC notice of meeting. A representative of the school district qualified to provide or supervise the provision of specially designed instruction, knowledgeable of the curriculum and district resources. The person who has authority to designate spending of funds within that district. That's the LEA representative. It's also a chairperson that's been trained. The chairpersons need to be trained, and they need to be board approved more than they need to be trained. We want them to be trained every year. We don't always get them trained every year, but we try to do that, especially for the new principals. I had a guy telling me the other day, you know what? Other than going to an ARC meeting every now and then when I was a regular ed teacher, once I became a principal, I was expected to know all this stuff. And I was expected to be able to, look at eligibility and do eligibility forms. And I was expected to do all of these things and know all of this information and compliance and whether or not the goals were written correctly and all that. So think about that for a second. We folks who have been in special ed since before the war ended, we understand this stuff, right? But we may have folks out there. So encourage your chairpersons in your districts. Encourage them to contact us. We have asynchronous trainings and we have synchronous trainings that we can provide them the latest information on, record review, all the things that, discipline, all the things they run into. But I really actually had a guy tell me that. He's an instructional supervisor now. And he said, when I was a principal, man, I tell you what, that was a lot to learn. That's a steep learning curve. So I didn't mean to go down a rabbit hole, but these representatives should be trained and they should be approved by the Board of Education. And let me tell you one other thing too. When you think about that ARC notice and you put, you should never put any, you should put the LEA representative there for that person that's inviting. Okay. Don't put a teacher's name. Don't put the ARC chairperson in that person that's inviting. Okay. You know what I'm talking about? Look at your notice and look at that very bottom signature or that very bottom role. That needs to be an ARC chairperson in that role right there. Okay. Because they are the people that has the authority to use funds and make decisions and that kind of thing. All right. Enough about that. An individual who can interpret the instructional implications of evaluation results who may be a member of the team described in 16 through 18. All right. So any of the invited roles from 16 to 18 have the right and have the, according to this document, according to the KARs, have the ability to interpret results. Now, most of the time it's a diagnostician or it's a school psychologist or it's the special education teacher that is actually looking at that psychological and interpreting those results and making those eligibility points that need to be made, whether or not that student meets that criteria. But this says that 16 through 18, so any of those people can be that person. And then related service personnel as appropriate. I've got an NA out here because most of the time when we review files, we don't see a lot of that. We see, very few percentage of kids have speech. We do see some with the initials, and we do see some in the lower grades where they're having speech, OT, PT, those kinds of things. So we're looking to see if there was any related services personnel invited that they signed the notice as such. Now, for children who are in the 8th grade or 14 or older, the child is involved in the ARC process relative to transition planning. Documentation shows that the following occurred. The student attended the meeting, or if the student did not attend the meeting, you have another way of including their preferences and interests. You have to document that with rich discussion in the conference summary. Okay. It's easier to have them there and say, we discussed the ILP. We discussed what the preferences and interests are. And we discussed with that student what coursework they need to be taking in order to get on that path. So we really are starting at the 8th grade to work toward filling out that multi-year course of study in an appropriate manner based on their preferences and interests. So that's why we need to invite them, or we need to have a blurb in the conference summary that says how we included that student's interest. Now that can be talking about the ILP, that can talking about the development of the multi-year course of study, and that's very important, when you're talking about compliance. Now we get to 22. If a member of the ARC is dismissed.
I've got a question about that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I don't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Right there, let's say, for example, we've got a student it's a transition meeting, and something happened that day, and the student could not attend, but the parent did. It would not be compliant to then sit down to have the student sign the meeting as being present and go over with them later.
I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't want to have anybody sign a meeting that wasn't there.
Well, I would not think so either. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, and then you can have that discussion with that student if they can't be there. You can have that discussion and put that in your conference summary minutes, but I wouldn't do it after the fact.
Right, but document it in the conference summary,
yeah.
And then the signature would not be required because it was documented because the student was not there.
Exactly. Good point.
That's what I thought, and I wanted to make sure I was correct on that.
Yeah.
And also, you can sometimes you're going over that with that student anyway.
Right.
You're going over the ILP. You're going over the transition assessment that you gave that child. You're going over those things, so you probably already had talked with the student about all that stuff. And if he doesn't attend, then you can go ahead and the child doesn't sign it, but in the conference summary, tell them, prior to the meeting, discuss that whole thing that you did.
Document that you did all that. Yes, I agree.
Thank you, Brenda. That's a good question. And thank you, Brenda. It's good to hear that voice. All right. So 22, we're about to talk about excusals. If a member of the ARC is dismissed from attending the ARC meeting in whole or in part, the parent and the district agree to dismissal in writing prior to the meeting. Then you get that excusal letter and you can go on and have that meeting. The statement must be dated prior to the meeting and signed by the parents and the district rep. And then 23 talks a little bit more about this. If a member, and again, you're looking at the notice of admission release committee meeting and the conference summary report to see if there's any documentation in regards to this. And what would key you into looking for this would be if you invited this person, but then they didn't sign. So you would look to see if there was an excusal letter when you're reviewing the file. And if a member of the ARC is dismissed, the member must submit input into the development of the IEP in writing to the parent and the ARC if the area's members' area of curriculum or related services to be modified or discussed in the meeting. Input must be permitted or must be submitted prior to the meeting. So now what's all that mean? Well, reviewing a file this morning, and I was looking at, conference or the present level has communication documented very well. Go over to the goals. There's a goal. Go over to the related services page on the services page of the IEP. There's minutes, but then the person didn't sign and was not at the meeting. So does the no, it's not. So what we start looking for is an excusal letter, and so we're looking to see when that person, that speech person, has a role in developing the IEP, and that their IEP, the IEP, they had an evaluation, they had all kinds of things, new information. So we have to see that. And please note that all this documentation with the excusal consent from the parent and the input from the excused practitioner must be dated prior to the meeting. Okay. So, we have some things come up and we understand that sometimes it's just good to go ahead and reschedule that meeting. Brenda, you have anything to add there?
I'm going to tell it's leaving in a few minutes. No, but that excusal letter, it's a must. And if you, the day of, say a OT couldn't come or something come up, I know they can use the phone and call and go over their part. But if it's an emergency and they can't get there, no, but that excusal letter, it's a must. And if you, the day of, say a OT couldn't come or something come up, I know they can use the phone and call and go over their part. But if it's an emergency and they can't get there or can't even talk because, something's really bad has happened, then, another speech teacher could probably do that. However, they would have to have her or his documents to go over that with the parent and with the ARC committee. So like Denny Paul said, it'd probably be best just to halt that and say, we need to reschedule this until so-and-so can be there. And that way you'll stay compliant.
And Brenda, when I was a director, I used to run into this all the time. You got a small district, you're contracting for OT services. The OT can't make it. You've got a timeline running thin. You don't want to reschedule, but you just have to kind of make a call at that point and say, what's right for this student. And you always want to keep the student in the center of the table in your ARC meetings and do what's right and what's best for that student. So anyway, we'll go on and pass on by that. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat. All right, let's talk about the conference summary itself. So if you're following along in a folder, pull out that most recent conference summary and let's look at that conference summary pretty closely. And let's look and we'll compare it again. Also use that ARC notice. Excuse me. If that was just good lunch or bad manners. So at any rate, we're looking at the conference summary. And the first note says, if relevant discussion occurs in the ARC meeting that's not reflected in any section of the conference summary, that discussion must be documented in the conference summary report minutes. What are they talking about there? They're talking about parents bringing in information that we're not expecting that's outside the purpose, the stated purpose of the meeting. So we would capture any of that and document anything that had gone on or any kind of discussion outside those purposes. That's what that's talking about. Information used that's not included on the evaluation plan is listed as other. So if we use some information and if we use some outside reports that maybe the parent brought in, we would list that as other. And we would look to the evaluation and plan and see did we have all those boxes checked? Did we use all that information? But then if we use other information, that's how we would document it. If an evaluation or reevaluation was conducted, the relevant descriptions must be marked. And they're talking about on that first page of the conference summary, make sure that you are giving credence to what you're using to make your decisions. All right. And for any annual review meeting, student progress in achieving IEP goals must be marked. Now, we see this sometimes. You'll be doing an annual review meeting, you forget to mark that. Okay. One of the clear purposes of developing the present level, one of the clear purposes of meeting for an annual review is to review. It says annual review. So we got to review where the student was when the cycle ended last time. We got to talk about that. So we want to mark that always for any subsequent IEPs, not the initial, but any subsequent IEPs. We would mark students' progress in achieving IEP goals, and we would have some discussion about that. And we would also include that student's baseline from that discussion in the present level. So we have a starting point for those goals. We're going to change, and we're going to talk about goals here in a second. So I'm not going to go into that rabbit hole right now. But so we're looking right now at 24, a description of each evaluation, procedure, test, record, or report used as a basis for the proposed or refused action, including boxes are checked for each evaluation, procedure, test, record, or report that the district used as a basis for the proposed or refused actions. Now, I want to ask you a question. The question is, we're doing transition meeting. Okay, we're doing it. It's one of the purposes of the meeting. The student is age 16. Should we mark ILP and multi-year course of study on the conference summary? Probably we should, right? Because the State Department's going to expect you to talk about those things. And those are some things that we look for when we look at this. So we're looking to see that you've marked student progress in achieving IEP goals. And if it's a transition one, we're looking to see, did you mark the appropriate things? Did you mark ILP? Did you mark multi-year course of study? We're also looking, if you're doing a 3-year re-eval, did you mark the appropriate types of evaluations that you're using to make those decisions? And so once we do that, we've got all the bases covered on that. And then we just take a peek to make sure that the computer generated that evaluation test and record sheet that gives those descriptions of each evaluation test. You know what I'm talking about? It's the conference summary. It's attached to that conference summary. And it's just that list of tests that you may give. Okay. Some districts I would see would even have you circle the ones that you are using on that, so that you would get that information. Kind of gives layman's terms to those tests, so that parents have clear language about what is being used to make these decisions. And that's generated by Infinite Campus. So you should always have that. Now, I said, yes, confirm that the description page is there on that one. So number 25, a description of the action proposed or refused. The form takes care of that. If you're looking on the page where the placement decisions are being made, okay, where you're making that, you've got that continuum of placement options, and you're working your way down from full-time regular ed on down to part-time, and all that. Those descriptions on the left-hand side of the page take care of 25. So when you're reviewing the file, you can always give that a yes, okay? Now, here's the problem. When you get to an explanation of why the LEA proposed or refused to take an action, we're looking for a little more information there. And we're looking for things that are going to prove to anyone outside that's reviewing this file as to why that student's placement needed to be restricted, okay? So those reasons why you can't get it done in the regular classroom. What are the reasons? Some of those reasons that we talk about are things like the student needs tons of repetition. They need a distraction-free environment. They need a smaller group. Those types of reasons are the reasons we restrict that environment. Brenda, I can see her wheels are turning. You have anything to say, Brenda, on that?
Well, I have to say this. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but I find that they are writing the same thing in the full-time general ed all the way down to the full-time special ed. Well, number one, your full-time special ed is more restrictive. So that would be the answer for that one if you have to do that. Some of the Infinite campuses are making them go down there once you check yes, then it stops. But then I'm finding that in some areas it's not. They're making you check all 3 boxes. So, but anyway, the third one, is most of it is too restricted for them. I find that they're writing a book in one section. I have seen 2 pages, 2 whole pages of just that part section F in that conference summary. And that is not what they're wanting. They're not wanting the ARC to determine this, that, or the other. They're wanting to know the reason. They're wanting to know why. Why can't this child participate in full-time general education? It could be low cognitive disability. The child needs more intense instruction or structure or anything. But you need to put the reason there and not write a book. All right,
and what Brenda's alluding to is when you work down that box, when you work down that and you finally select a place for that student to go, you stop. Okay, so if you go, and most of our kids fall in that middle section. I say most, not all, but most fall in that middle section. Some fall in the top section, but once you select a section, you say, yeah, you don't have to go any further. You don't have to put reasons on down through there and mark all those boxes. And that's just something we see sometimes when we review files and when we're part of the audit process that KDE conducts.
Do you have anything like an example of good reasons to put in those boxes that you'd like to see?
Brenda, you want to speak to that?
Yes, we have. You should have the 6-page document that we had out. It was in draft form, and then a couple of years ago, I took it out of draft and added a few things and sent it out. I think you got that.
I'll have to check and see if I have that.
If not, just send me an email.
Yeah, just let us know. You know, we're talking about things like.
I like to compare what you want to see comparison into what I do.
Well, I can say this too, Brandon, that, you know, lots of times we'll say we want to see reasons like the student needs a distraction-free environment. The student, you know, if they're attention deficit, you know, so you wouldn't do the same thing for everyone. It needs to be somewhat individualized. You know what I'm saying? And
Yes.
to that student and their disability. What's causing the effects of that disability and how that restricts that environment. You know, because the law says LRE that you're supposed to be educated with the non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. So as we move down that continuum, we want to think about what is it actually that this student can't do in the regular classroom. And it may be like they need lots of repetition. They need immediate feedback. They need a smaller group. They do better in a smaller group. Those kinds of things, you know. And I'm just off the top of my head, Brenda's got some well-established reasons in a document, and she doesn't care to share those with you. So anyway, go on, a description of any of the other options, reasons those options were rejected. And we say usually, you know, this is an NA for 27 and 28, but if that parent brings in something, we're supposed to document it. And if we use something other than was marked on the evaluation plan to make our decisions, because that parent brought in something we wasn't expecting, we have to document it, okay? Sometimes they'll bring in an evaluation, and we have to at least consider it and document it.
Or a service pet.
Yes.
You know, when we back up there just a few minutes, there continuum of placement on section F, a lot of people in LRE will say as needed. Do not put that in there. If you put as needed, then it's needed. All right. The reason why a lot of people don't understand is, yes, they're in the general education classroom all the time, except when they need their accommodations for their assessments. So yes, they are pulled from that classroom for accommodation purposes. Well, when you do that, that means it's going to go to the next level. So it's going to be part-time general ed and part-time special ed. Anytime you have to pull a child out for anything, it's part-time.
And wouldn't you say, Brenda, too, that we see lots of records that have as needed, we're going to pull them out when this happens, we're going to pull them out when that happens. What the State Department wants is definitive statements about what you're doing with that kid consistently and leaving that conjecture out. Okay. And they want that LRE statement on the IEP and the services page to match. So when you look at page 58 of your IEP guidance document, it gives you those ways of documenting the LRE. It's supposed to match the services page as well as the placement option you just decided and what we're talking about here on conference summary. And then also it's supposed to mesh up with your potential for harmful effects of the placement. So those are things that we want to keep in mind. Now, down on 29, we're looking to see, did these parents sign the signature page? If not, did we provide them with a full copy of the parent rights at least annually? And then there are some other times when we're supposed to give them a full copy of their parent rights. We like to see this statement about how we went over the parent rights with them at annual review. We gave them a copy. We asked them if they understood their rights, and they stated, yes, they understood their rights. That covers us, I think. Okay. We'll never say definitively anything about a court of law, because what we're saying here legally, there are times in the law when you have to give the parent rights in its entirety. Okay. Now, I was reviewing a file this morning, and there's an addendum, or there's a condensed version of that. Perfectly okay to use that to describe things for parents, but when it talks about parent rights, you're supposed to give those in their entirety. I think it's like 32 pages long, and sometimes they'll be in those meetings for several years, and they'll hand them right back over there to you, but at least you gave them to them, and you document as such, and that they understood them, that you broke it down for them. Okay, this section has to do with looking at the IFSP. If you're a preschool teacher, you're looking at that signature page or the conference summary with LEA representative signatures. And it says on 30, for preschoolers transitioning from Part C, a district rep participated in transition conferences arranged by First Steps, included in the record this intro meeting. I've got that annotation. What that means is that this meeting is not the LEA's meeting. It's not Jenkins's meeting. It's not Breathitt County's meeting. It's not Letcher County's meeting. It's not Pike County's meeting. It's the First Steps meeting. Okay. So what you're doing is you're just introducing your program, but you want to keep a copy of that. And what I did when I was a director, I had me a little form filled out and I had everybody sign, and I just put some information on there about our preschool program. And then we get ready for that next meeting where we're going to do the planning of the evaluation for that student. So this is the First Steps transition meeting that must occur at least 3 months prior to the child's 3rd birthday. This is not a district meeting. It usually takes place in the child's home. We say keep that documentation, that IFSP copy, and that we include that all in the record. For preschoolers transitioning from Part C on 31A, the IFSP was considered in developing the IEP. So in that next meeting, you would make a blurb in your conference summary saying that you referred to the family service plan that was in place for that student when they were prior to 3 years of age, that First Steps used to give developmental therapy services. All right, and for 31B, for children exiting Part C, documentation shows that the IEP was developed and implemented by the child's 3rd birthday. Look to see if the IEP is in place by 3 years of age. And you would document the child's birth date, the development of the ARC date, the date the referral was made by First Steps, and the date accepted by the LEA. So you got to have those IEPs in place by the child's 3rd birthday. Now, we've been going for right at about an hour. So let's take a 5-minute break and we'll come back and discuss IEP with you, and we'll go in depth about what we want to see with the IEP, because I will preview this and give a segue into our next part of this session. Present level is of utmost importance to KDE right now. It is the focal point. So we're going to hit that pretty hard. And let's take 5 minutes. We'll come back at 11:15. I'm sorry, 1:15.
I have one more question before you move to the IEP. I just didn't want to jump back to the conference.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Go ahead.
And I didn't see it on here. Is the section where you do the LRE section under that for harmful effects? The harmful effects box under placement options. Under what circumstances should we denote harmful effects? Because to me, that is worded as such: the placement of the child, harmful effects of on the placement upon the child. It's not necessarily if they have ADHD and are distractible or a behavior problem. We document those behaviors there.
Now you consider that every meeting. You consider that placement, and is there any potential for there to be harmful effects? And think about it like this, Brandon. This is the way I always thought about it. The more restricted, the more potential.
I agree. And under what yes, I agree. And under what circumstance should we provide a statement in that box?
That have to be an individualized decision. Okay. Brenda, go ahead. Brenda was going to say something. I can see her.
Yes, this is for like a child that may have a danger to himself or others. You may have had this happen in your district. I know it happened in our district that we had one teacher, one aide, and one child in a humongous room because the child was dangerous, very dangerous. So you have to be careful. You couldn't turn your back on him and he'd choke you, or those types of things. So when something happens like that, and normally you're aware of stuff that comes in, but sometimes we have these students that come in that we don't know, we've never heard about, they're foster kids. So at that time, we have to take that IEP and we have to read it thoroughly to see what behaviors this child has. Now, lots of times I'm always eerie about someone else's IEP, and you don't want to label a child as being a danger. You want to wait firsthand to see what's going to happen. So, you know, you should go ahead and accept the IEP if you can do it in your district. But, and then the following year, you may change something if they don't have that. But most of the time, when you're marking that box and you're writing in there Choky or, you know, those types of things. So when something happens like that, and normally you're aware of stuff that comes in, but sometimes we have these students that come in that we don't know, we've never heard about, they're foster kids. So at that time, you know, we have to take that IEP and we have to read it thoroughly to see what behaviors this child has. Now, lots of times I'm always eerie about someone else's IEP, and you don't want to label a child as being a danger. You want to wait firsthand to see what's going to happen. So, you know, you should go ahead and accept the IEP if you can do it in your district. But, and then the following year, you may change something if they don't have that. But most of the time, when you're marking that box and you're writing in there that the child will pick up a pencil and stab you, or you know, whatever, you know, it's a lot of behavior is what that is in that section, but sometimes not. We just have to make sure that we write a statement of what we are going to do with that child if you do mark that box. So, you know, you need to make sure you understand what you're going to do with the child and talk with your director about how you all are going to go on. Because
you know, Brenda, I agree 110% with you. You got to have a statement there when that student is and dangerous and you're restricting their environment. They're not really getting that interaction with their peer, and so that really poses that potential. And you know, so the more restricted and the more reasons for restricting, the more potential for harm.
More harmful it would be.
Yeah. Okay, so let's take till 1:20, and we'll be back with you in just a few minutes. We're looking at, just to circle the wagons, go back and pick up what we were talking about. We're looking at IEP. We're gonna look at the previous IEP, and we're gonna look at the current IEP, and we're gonna see if those things are in timeline. We're gonna put down both dates, and we're gonna look to see that meeting was held within that 365-day period. Here we are. Now talking about the present levels. Now I will say that KDE they let us know back when the year started that present level was going to be a point of emphasis. So we really needed to train that up. We really needed to work on that. We really needed to look for and really grade hard the IEPs that we're looking at. So there are some things that you need to have in there. First of all, it says when you do an A review, you must have the student's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, including how the disability affects involvement and progress in the general curriculum. Now, we're talking about adverse effect statements here, okay? We're talking about impact statements, whatever you call them in your district. We're talking about being able to say, based on that student's disability, what is the residual effect of that disability on their performance, both academically and functionally. And we have to have some point of comparison in lots of ways. We need to know what's expected at a particular grade level, what's expected within the particular standards, because we are doing standards-based IEPs. Those standards guide the development of our IEP. We know that the IEP is not intended to be the entire curriculum. It's only a piece of the of work that we're providing the student in order to close gaps, provide access to the general curriculum, and those kinds of things. Now, each area, it says note, and this is so important. Each area includes strengths. I get reviews back from the state. 33E has no strength. 33E is general intelligence. If they've got 33 broken down by letter: A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And so let's just take a look here for a minute at something that we've developed here at KVEC. we have the Iep Coaching tool. Let's see if I can open it a little bit further. That way you can see it a little bit better. And then I can change the view and I can zoom it in just a little bit. And I can do that again. Get a little larger on your screen so that you can see that. Okay, so what we did is we took, and with our Iep Coaching tool, we went in and we looked at the present level. And we said, you know what, there's certain things you have to have in present level. If you look here by communication status, you see that there needs to be strength. Anytime this box is not checked, anytime the student is not commensurate with similar age peers, anytime there's needs involved and you're going to address those needs, anytime you leave that box unchecked, you must have strengths around skills. You must have needs around skills. You must have progress data, and you must be able to discern what is the baseline for that student right now in present level. And then what is the adverse effect? How does the disability impact the student's academic performance and functional performance? Now, up here in gray on our document, we gave you some considerations for marking commensurate with similar age peers. If you mark this box commensurate, but you still need to put information in these boxes, you can do so, okay? For example, you've got a kid that wears eyeglasses. Is it important for everyone that is an implementer and everyone that's going to review that IEP to know that that student wears eyeglasses and that's when they do their best work? Yes. Now, is that eyeglasses situation mitigated when that student, or that need mitigated when that student puts those eyeglasses on? The answer is yes. So that would be a time when you could mark the box commensurate, but still put some information in there. Now, if you leave the box open and you put eyeglasses, they're going to say, we're going to cite you for strengths, needs, baseline, adverse effect. Okay. So that's what we have happen sometimes. So we want to be really clear about that, about what's supposed to be there. Okay. Now we realize too that academic performance section, the health section, I'll just kind of scroll down there and show you that. Those sections, as well as the social emotional section, differs from the general intelligence and the transition present levels. So we've got some other information to share with you, but we're going to go back to the academic performance for just a second, and we're going to look at some things that we have developed. So we need to say, we need our present levels to look like this. Here are the strengths. Here's the things the student does well in regards to academic performance. Is it okay to say the student's a nice person and has a pleasant personality? Absolutely. Everybody needs to know that. But it's also important to know how the student learns best and what style they use and what are the things that we can accentuate. So we have strengths identified, and then we have also we have needs identified, and those needs are identified through a filtering process. We look at state and district testing. We look at academic achievement testing. We look at IQ testing. We look at MAP tests. We look at all those big, large tests that are only given a few times a year or once every 3 years. And that puts us in a ballpark in these academic areas. Where reading comprehension, there's 5 areas of reading. So we want to know what is the discrete skill, what is the need, where's the breakdown occurring. And so we developed this little sheet. It's a Google sheet. I'm not going to open it all the way, but it talks about the filtering process and the steps that you need to go through in order to filter down to the discrete skill that you're going to probe and write a baseline score on. Okay. And so when we hear this from the State Department all the time, there's no data in the present level. You've identified the strength and you've written a bunch of test scores in there, but there's not any data that speaks to the baseline. There's not any data that speaks to the progress monitoring that occurred on the previous IEP. Okay. So how do we develop baseline? We went ahead and we said, okay, let's look at, from that filtering process, we realized that under reading comprehension, It may be fluency. That's the major indicator that we need to include and write a goal on. So, or it may be something else. It may be phonemic awareness. It may be their inability to blend sounds. It may be fluency. It may be a lot of things that are causing that problem. But when we look at the establishing baseline, I'm going to open this one and show you the best I can here. So, how to establish baseline? Which data source will you use? Will the data come from progress monitoring of previous goals, or will it come from data derived from new probes? Now, if you're going to use the same goal from the last cycle, and you're going to use that as progress monitoring, that goal needs to stay the same, and maybe just change the percentage that you're going to shoot for. So you would adjust the percentage or the criteria, but you would have to, if you're going to keep the same goal, you would want to keep the same behavior, the same tool that you're measuring it with, and the same conditions under which you're going to measure it, so that it's comparing apples to apples, and that you can, in fact, show that that progress continues to occur. If that's at the end of the cycle, if you discern or decide as an ARC that that goal needs to continue, you've got to keep those things the same and bring that goal forward. If you decide to change the behavior, the tool that you're measuring the behavior with, or the conditions, then you need to do your own new probes around that new discrete skill. So we talk about the filtering process. It's all laid out there for you on the Iep coaching tool. So now let's go back to our compliance record review. So when we look at communication status, we're looking to see, and I would say the number one thing that is missed would be, one, we don't see a lot of strengths around. We do a good job of identifying what the student's not doing well, but we need to identify what the student is doing well. So we're looking for those four things. If you go back to the Iep coaching tool for just a second, and you see out there, and we've got this checklist out here. Are there strengths? Are there needs? Is there data with a baseline established? Is there progress monitoring data within that present level? And is there an adverse effect statement? So those are the problems that we see when we review a file. So we're looking to review that file in such a way that we see that all that stuff is there. And I've already talked about the box being checked as commensurate and being able to put things in there. So now we also realize that at some point we actually need to talk about, I've got starred 33D. The social emotional section should be addressed with all four components. Discrete skills must be accompanied with baseline data and progress monitoring data. Strengths need baseline adverse effect. Well, where does this come from? If you've got a student that has a composite score of 78, 77.5 or lower, and they're in special education, then they've got problems with adaptive behavior, and it should be addressed. So you're going to put the high and low scores from the Vineland, and then you're going to identify what the needs are around that low score, and then you're going to develop a goal, particularly if that kid has an intellectual disability. If you've got a kid that's MMD or FMD, their IQ 70, their adaptive behavior 70, 55 or 55, then you should have goals for all the academic areas as well as an adaptive goal. And so when we talk about social emotional status, lots of times this one gets marked off. I mean, we get this all the time. 33D doesn't have any strengths. 33D doesn't have any baseline or progress data. In order to have a baseline and progress monitor, you've got to have numbers. So whatever skill you pick out from that communication piece or that daily living piece, whatever skill that discrete skill that you choose from that low area on that Vineland, you got to put some data with it. The student can do this for 40% of the time. And then you follow that up with a goal. Okay. So you make sure that whatever present level whatever you've said there, you've listed it as a need, you put a percentage with it, and you follow that up with a goal that corresponds with that need that you've brought up. And so that's how you do that. And that one's a little bit different. and that's a little bit of a new thing for some of our districts. If your kids are MMD, they need an adaptive goal. If they're FMD, they need an adaptive goal. And you look at the Vineland scores, you look at the ABOS, you look at whatever adaptive test you give, and you look for that low score, that low subtest score. And then you go into that Vineland and you look at the skills that that kid is deficient in, and you develop a goal around that, and you do your probes around that. You come up with a baseline, and then you write a goal from that baseline percentage. Any questions? Just if you have questions, that's fine. Pose those questions. If you have something to put in the chat, you can also put it in the chat, and we'll monitor that as well. But that is one that gives us fits. Now, general intelligence is something totally different. We don't write goals from general intelligence, okay? So how do we provide progress data for this area? And because these present levels are a little different, we want to kind of show you some of what we think needs to be done with the present level in general intelligence. You see right here, this is the same page from your record review that we've been talking about. Here are the things that are needed: strengths, needs, baseline, and performance and evaluation data. You also have to have an adverse effect statement that goes along with that, how the disability impacts. Okay, but you also have to tie this general intelligence back to a baseline. Okay, to show what impact that intelligence is having, that disability with that intelligence is having on academic and functional performance. So we realize those have to be there. So then we break it down here. We see that his need here, they go into the IQ test, and they find that his working memory and his reasoning ability is impacted to a degree relative to himself. He's not doing well with that. So he has a deficit in working memory, holding information and mental awareness. Now, within our Iep coaching tool, we've attached and made addendums to that tool that have a flow chart, or a chart that will tell you this is the piece from general intelligence. This is the subtest section for general intelligence, whether it be visual, spatial, or it be working with information, or whatever it might be, whatever section. We've got that crosswalk there for you, that WISC crosswalk or that Kaufman crosswalk attached, and I'll show you that in just a second. But what I want you to know here is that the strengths, needs, baseline, performance evaluation data is highlighted here in this exemplar. And this exemplar, it kind of shows you that we're identifying strengths, relative strengths for this kid, by saying that the WISC is identifying this, that the student he has processing speed off the charts. That's a strength. We know processing speed's off the charts. So that can inform our specially designed instruction and how we're supposed to instruct that kid. But we also know that when we look at those scores, we realize that he's got a relative strength in processing speed, but his need is in the area of working memory. He's got memory issues. So we're going to incorporate working memory types of special design instruction into their academic performance and their functional performance. And when we look for baseline, we're going to see academic and social emotional present levels, current baseline, and supporting data. So we're going to cite that, and we're going to push the person that's reviewing the file to look at the baseline that's established under functional performance and academic performance. And then we're going to develop a real well-developed adverse effect statement down here to take care of everything that needs to be taken care of. So we identify the strengths by looking at those relative subtest scores in the WISC that are higher relative to themselves. We see the subtest scores that are lower and how they're impacting. Now let's go back to our copy of our Iep coaching tool. And let's look down here. Brenda did a marvelous job of including this. And she broke it down, put it in a chart. Dion helped us kind of put it in a visual way that we could see it. And we got the information, but we got this is the WISC, verbal comprehension index, the academic impact, what we would do for special design instruction, and how that would impact our selection of supplementary aids and services for that student in general, okay? We also have down here at the bottom these crosswalks, okay? And this sharing right is supposed to be updated for you. And maybe it is, maybe it's not, but we got the whisk one here. And I know you can't see that very well. I'll try to open that a little bit better so that you can see that that's part of our IEP coaching tool. It's taking a minute. I don't know if you can see that on the screen, but you get the idea. It has the index. It tells you what the supports are. It tells you everything you need to know in regards to how that general intelligence is impacting that student's ability to access the general curriculum and how it's going to impact their academic performance and their functional performance. So when KDE reviews your files, it's so very important that you are able to do general intelligence a little different. Now, if I go back to my exemplars, there's also a section here with these exemplars that talks about how to do transition, okay, and what we're looking for there. And we'll talk about that in a little bit later as we move through. So let's go back here. So now we're looking for, under this section, we're looking for strengths identified around skills. We're looking for needs identified with data attached to them, with probes attached to them, and percentages attached to them. And we're looking for, within general intelligence and social emotional status, under social emotional status, we're looking for references to the Vineland and what the low scores are and what the skills are. And if they're MMD and FMD, it's a must per KDE. And then we're looking under general intelligence. We're looking at that relative of those scores. We're breaking those scores down. We're looking at the impact that's making on academic functional performance. And we're citing back to the baseline in academic performance, social emotional. Now, if you got a kid that's ADHD, you would cite baseline back to that health, vision, motor section. You would want to put that there. You know, how long can they sustain attention? How long? What's the percentage? So you would tie them back there. If they have those, put it in a visual way that we could see it, and we got the information. But we got verbal. This is the WISC verbal comprehension index, the academic impact, what we would do for special design instruction, and how that would impact our selection of supplementary aids and services for that student in general. Okay. We also have down here at the bottom these crosswalks. Okay. And this sharing right is supposed to be updated for you. And maybe it is, maybe it's not, but we got the whisk one here. And I know you can't see that very well. I'll try to open that a little bit better so that you can see that that's part of our IEP coaching tool. It's taking a minute. I don't know if you can see that on the screen, but you get the idea. It has the index. It tells you what the supports are. It tells you everything you need to know in regards to how that general intelligence is impacting that student's ability to access the general curriculum and how it's going to impact their academic performance and their functional performance. So when KDE reviews your files, it's so very important that you are able to do general intelligence a little different. Now, if I go back to my exemplars, there's also a section here with these exemplars that talks about how to do transition, okay, and what we're looking for there. And we'll talk about that in a little bit later as we move through. So let's go back here. So now we're looking for, under this section, we're looking for strengths identified around skills. We're looking for needs identified with data attached to them, with probes attached to them, and percentages attached to them. And we're looking for, within general intelligence and social emotional status, under social emotional status, we're looking for references to the Vineland and what the low scores are and what the skills are. And if they're MMD and FMD, it's a must per KDE. And then we're looking under general intelligence. We're looking at that relative of those scores. We're breaking those scores down. We're looking at the impact that's making on academic functional performance, and we're citing back to the baseline in academic performance, social emotional. Now, if you got a kid that's ADHD, you would cite baseline back to that health, vision, motor section. You would want to put that there. You know, how long can they sustain attention? How long? What's the percentage? So you would tie them back there if they have those difficulties. Keep in mind, whatever makes that student eligible, you better be addressing. Okay, whatever makes that student eligible, you better be addressing for your OHI kids. Okay, so just keep that in mind.
The general intelligence section, what KDE is really looking at is the connection from their intelligence to the academics. So just make sure you have some kind of connection in there with that. And that's where your strengths and concerns, those things will come from.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead,
should we always discuss intelligence, even let's say on a review for an SLD student that may be in one area of reading, but have an average IQ that may be 86, that's not sending you to Harvard, but it's, it's not MMD either. I mean, I don't know. Should we discuss that?
That's a good question, Brandon. That's a good question. And what I would say to that would be, if the child's academic or if the child's general intelligence functioning is commensurate, then you may not have to do that.
Okay.
But if it's impacting the way they're learning, you might want to do that. Brenda?
Yeah, if a child has issues with reading, that's the academic piece. And on that crosswalk that we created with the Iep coaching tool, it will show those things for you. And you can look at the impact and all that type of stuff on that. But the reading is what you will be addressing in there, because that's the academic piece that we're looking at, or KDE, whoever's going to be looking at.
Right. And we have lots of kids that are found eligible, other health impaired. They got an ADHD diagnosis. We see this all the time. But we also see that they have a 78 IQ. That's significant. Okay, that's a significant piece, right? And I know what you're saying, Brandon. The question you pose is a good question. But
like what you're just saying right there is a prime example.
Yeah, this is a prime example. We don't want to dismiss that. And then we also need to look at that student's academic or adaptive functioning, particularly if they're MMD or FMD. And we need to look at those filing scores, and we need to be writing goals to help their adaptive functioning as well, their functional performance as well as their academic performance, because that's just as key in the eyes of the law, and it's just as key for that student. So that's something to consider and something to think, and it's something that's missed, and it's something that's cited quite readily by KDE. Now, we get to the section in this guidance doc or the record review document where we're looking at to see if the goals are written in a way that they're measurable. The most important thing is, you can have all 6 components that the Iep guidance document talks about. You can have the F, the E, the D, the C, the B, and the A, and it still not be measurable because of the type of behavior you've written in. Or it might not be able to be measured by the tool that you put in there. So what we look at when we review the files, we're trying to the ceiling here again, okay? Some people would argue minimum compliance says that you don't have to have frequency included. We say in the KVEC region that we're doing what's right for the child, and you have to have frequency of data collection in order to do progress monitoring correctly and to be able to definitively say that these strong trends are saying how it's informing our instruction and whether or not that student's actually making progress. So when we review files, we look to see, are all the components there, and 2, is the goal itself measurable? And sometimes we'll have 6, I reviewed one this morning, all 6 components there, beautifully written goal, but they use the word improve and increase instead of actually saying the student's going to read, or the student's going to write, or the student's going to count. Something we can see, hear, count, or time makes it measurable. So you got to be careful about those verbs. We also included in the WISC or in the IEP coaching tool, some measurable verbs, that Bloom's taxonomy, where you make sure you've got measurable verbs. So right here, we just want to make sure that the goals have 6 components listed in the IEP guidance document, and that we have not overlooked this, and that the measurable goals must relate directly to the present levels and meet the child's academic and other educational needs that result from the disability. So it's right there in black and white. Attack the things that result from the disability first, okay? And then if they're significantly below the same age peers in other areas, you can add those on as well, okay? But you got to attack those things that make them eligible first. So, do we want an evaluation method of measurement tool embedded? On your drop down, look at your IEP, and you've got under your goal, you've got a drop down box that lists method of measurement, right? And you're going to get things like curriculum-based measures, indirect, direct, and authentic. Those are your choices. Now, we realize those are choices, but those are broad areas, okay? What we want in the goal is a discrete or a very specific, I should say, not discrete, but a very specific tool. So like if you're measuring behavior and you want to know how long a behavior lasts, you use duration recording. If you want to count how many times it occurs, you're going to use a frequency count. Those things need to be embedded in your goals to show how you're progress monitoring that student's behavior, okay? If you're going to use curriculum-based measures, the word we use, Brenda tells me this all the time, the word we use is probes, but that goes with curriculum-based measure. So down in that box, you would have on your check box, on your drop-down box, you would have curriculum-based measures. Up in your goal, you would have probes, and those probes are things like reading and math and fluency and those types of things. So your circumstances sometimes give you a problem. The circumstance is intended to be the conditions under which the verb is going to be measured, okay? So don't make it too broad, okay? Don't say all day during school, we're going to measure this behavior, okay? You can't possibly do it. Don't make it a goal that you can't possibly measure it. It's going to occur here, 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 and here. It's like, the exits in the Disney movie. The exits are here, 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 and here. No, we don't need that. We need to know how what conditions under which that student's verb, that goal, that discrete skill is going to be measured, okay? And percentages. Those percentages that you select in degree criterion should have a connection to the baseline information and the progress data that you put in your present level. So if you're saying the kid can use the R sound 40% of the time in conversational speech, then over here in the goal, you should have something that speaks to that. And that percentage needs to be a little bit higher because you're setting a goal. The baseline's 60 or the baseline's 40, the goal is 80, okay? So that's so important. Now, the next section is about progress data collection and analysis for each annual goal. The IEP guidance document has a well-developed guide for you in terms of what's expected, okay? What is expected there? And I've got in my annotation, most of the time, this is not intact. This item's not intact. You've got a progress report that kind of looks like a Infinite Campus generated report. We realize, Brenda, now that Infinite Campus is generating graphs for us, we have to have certain things that go in the graph. And these notes here under 38 kind of tell us what's expected there, okay? We need dates that match the frequency that you've indicated in your goal. That's the way we do it in Kentucky, okay? And so that's what we need to be following. If KDE looks at it, they may or may not cite you on this, but we are saying this is the way we progress monitor. This is the way we ensure that the student is receiving the implementation of IEP. The other thing we got to keep in our back of our head is if we ever had the unfortunate misery of going to due process, that we are compliant enough and that we've provided what that student needs, and we can say we have provided FAPE for that kid. How can we definitively say we provided FAPE? By doing progress monitoring, by implementing the goal, and by keeping good documentation. So is the data collected consistent with the frequency outlined in the goal? Does the trend data that you have found, do you have a graph that has an aim line, a trend line, and the baseline denoted? Do you have analysis? Did you include in your conference summary the analysis from the last IEP cycle? Those are all well documented in the IEP guidance document. Analysis that follows the IEP guidance document should be included, I say here. Okay, so you've got a kid that's making progress, a kid that may not be making progress. You've got some examples in there of what you're supposed to be talking about. And there's purposes for progress monitoring. Progress monitoring informs your special design instruction. Is it the right instruction? It also informs you, is the student trending toward meeting the goal? So there's lots of purposes for the progress monitoring. And we're looking in the conference summary, if we review this, to see that there's some analysis at annual review. And I would say that might be the number one thing that I see missing. And Brenda is shaking her head. She is giving an affirmative. So if you can see her in the window.
That's one reason why KDE has developed that goal monitoring tab now for everybody to put their progress monitoring in where they can view it. In the past, we were supposed to be uploading progress monitoring for them to view, and I would say 95% of people teachers weren't doing that. So they now decided to do the goal monitoring tab, which is very simple. I'm not going to go into that, but it's very simple to do, and I would advise you to use it. Doesn't take very long at all. I've seen it in action.
And
it's
we
very
know,
useful.
yeah,
Yes.
Brandon's saying it's very useful. I know Letcher County's got it well developed, got it up and running in their district. Regina has done a good job with that. She's trained your folks, and people are doing what they need to be doing. And I've had other people tell me that from other districts that, you know, it's working wonderfully, and it gives you the goal, and you don't have to walk around with an Excel. I have very few skills within Excel. Excel gives me headaches, and so you know, I'm old and I didn't have all that training, and so it's one of those things that I think it's right there at your fingertips. Why not use it, right? And now let's talk about 39 special design instruction. We're looking to see, you know, do the strategies match the skills? Is the special design instruction in fact special design instruction? Are we doing it at an intensity, at a level, at a degree that's going to meet that student's needs? And is it copied and pasted from IEP to IEP? Is it consistent? If I come and look at 8 of your files, is every one of them going to be the same? Did we copy and paste? You know, that kind of thing. So you got to get strategies that match the student for their needs, and you need to be able to answer. And you need to have a toolbox equipped with some high leverage practices that are research based, that have strategies that you know you're going to have reading problems coming to you this year. You know you're going to have the inability to reason coming towards you for math, the inability to remember things. You know, those automaticity types of skills that students lack in special education. We know there's certain things coming at us every year. We know students can't stay on task. We know there's going to be behavior issues. So we put in our toolbox some of those high leverage practices, and we develop things around that special design instruction. Special design instruction should include explicit instruction. It should include vocabulary instruction. It should include skills that are going to improve memory, skills that are going to improve their automaticity, lots of repetition, lots of immediate feedback, lots of student response being elicited through the pillars of literacy. You should be able to answer for your parent as a teacher, as a practitioner, as a special educator, what's so special about special design instruction. And in order to do that, you got to develop your toolbox and have those free upfront tools ready to go. And then when you get an outlier, you get a disability that you're not used to, you can do the research, do the reading, and find the strategies that fit that. But you should have some well-developed strategies from year to year that you're included in that special design instruction. So we look to see that they're matching and that they're written in a way that they're going to attack the needs of that student in that particular academic or functional area. Okay. Then we look at supplementary aids and services. We know that supplementary aids and services is what the student needs. It can be anything as simple as a pencil grip. And we know that we look at those and we caution you not to put a laundry list in there and not to put the same things for every student. You can get yourself in a world of hurt, not only with litigation, but you can also have KDE calling your hand on, why are you doing all of these things? You can't possibly do all these things. All these things don't make sense with what you're writing in your goals. You know, they're in, I had one the other day where the supplementary aids and services didn't jive with what was selected on the state test. So they'd said something like the student needs digital, but then over here they'd selected human and that kind of thing. So you can really get yourself into trouble if you just start copying and pasting a bunch of stuff. So we want to make sure that you understand that accommodations, modifications, technology, additional supervision, these things cannot be left blank. They have to need these services. They have to need special design instruction, and they have to have an adverse effect in order to be eligible and have that meet that criteria for being eligible. So consideration of individual accommodations for administration of state assessments, district assessments, and assessments in the classroom is documented. We look to see that they check the boxes. We look to see that the student's eligible. We look to see that there's a current IEP. We look to see that these things are being provided consistently. Brenda, you want to speak about this? You're muted, darling.
Finally. I was looking up there at that supplementary aids and services and thinking about those accommodations that they wanted to mark and those types of things. You know, with the calculator and with the reader, you have an option to pick one of those options. However, when you're looking at your supplementary aids and services, you might want to add the other as a supplementary aid and service, but not as accommodation. But just remember, it's a supplementary aid and service. You want to make sure the student is getting the one that works best for him or her. And the other one can be your supplementary aids and service.
Very good. Okay, so
I understand that, but that's really hard, especially when you get into a reader. You know, it's kind of a blend of that would be great if they would allow us to check both, because, you know, there are times when they don't have a text reader and we have to read it, and times when we're not there to read it and they have a text reader. So it's kind of, you know, it's kind of both when they.
And on those Chromebooks, it has the software text to speech, so it can read it. And that to me, that would be, if you read it personally, that would be what you would want to put on your accommodations. But if you don't read it personally, then do use the computerized technology version, then that's the one that you'd want to mark. But I'm with you. I think we should be allowed to mark both, especially during this pandemic, so we can get over it.
Yes.
Okay, so you know, and that's a good discussion, Brandon. We appreciate your comments. We really do, because it makes for better training, and we want to hear what your questions are and clarifications and that kind of thing. And if you need to, you can put it in the chat as well, and we can monitor that. But it's perfectly okay to stop us and let's talk about some things. The one thing I would say too about accommodations, and you know, you can accommodate things, you can modify things in the classroom, but there's a distinction made when you get ready to go to the state test, and that, you know, you have to have that training, inclusion documents training, and you have to know what's allowed and what's not allowed. Sometimes things are allowed in the classroom that are not allowed on the state test. And so we want to try to do what the student needs in order to get them educated and provide access to the curriculum, because that's what the purpose of accommodations are. But we really want to make sure that we're not overstepping our bounds and going too far when it comes to state testing. So the next section has to do with decisions on alternate assessment. And it says statement of decisions and reason for meeting the requirements for alternate assessment program as reflected in the participation guidelines documentation. Look for, is the student on alternate? Did they get yes on all the questions on the learner characteristics inventory? And look in the conference summary for statements and decisions to have them on alternate assessment. This has to be documented. There's a flow chart. There's a participation. There's a guidance document that helps FMD teachers with this process. Deciding, because we're being monitored, you know, if you over-identify or over-represent, you go over 1% of your population, you're going to get dinged, and you're going to have to do some things to, you know, you're going to have a citation, you're going to get a desk review, you're going to get an audit, you're going to get a cap. And so we just went through this not too long ago, and we want you to realize that there is a guidance document on Katie's website around this, and it has a flow chart for ARC. And you're basically looking at things like, did we, each and every time, did we discuss what the diploma options are? Did we provide the parent with the parent guide? Did we determine the student's level of communication? Did we fill out the learner characteristic inventory and notice that the student across the board in all settings needs you know, this real intense instruction, and that they have communication issues, and that they need to be on alternate assessment? So we really need, just because they are low functioning doesn't always mean that they need to be taking a test on alternate assessment. 43B. So we're saying, look in the conference summary to see that the parent has been provided with the parent guide and diploma options are discussed and documented. All 4 criteria met for eligibility. The learner characteristic inventory and the communication plan has been completed, discussed, and documented. Explain the difference between an alternate high school diploma and a regular one. Does the student require extensive individualized instruction and accommodations, assistive technology? And if the student meets requirements to participate, did we document the current level of communication? Now, when we review files, lots of times we're seeing that you're not documenting what the current level of communication is. So how does the student communicate? Do they do it by talking? Do they do it by communicating through gestures, grunts, and eye gaze? Even if you do this and you develop this, you still need to document in the conference summary, okay? Because they will ding you over that. Then 43C, I've also got ARC should document that all criteria have been met and that the student has a significant cognitive disability. Document sources of data. You go through the LCI and you get comfortable and you feel like, you know, I've done what I needed to do, but you need to have a discussion of all those things. Okay, so that's very, very important. 43C, if the student meets requirements to participate in the alternate assessment documentation in the IEP shows evidence of a communication plan. If the student's communication is diminished in a way that requires a plan, it must be documented. The communication plan may be documented in the present levels, the special factors, the measurable annual goals, supplementary aids and services areas of the IEP. But then you would circle back and document in the conference summary where it's documented. Make sure that you're very clear about that, because this is a real problem for districts that are over-identifying and got more than 1% of their population on alternate. All right, moving on down, least restrictive environment. An explanation of the extent, if any, to which the student will not participate with non-disabled peers or non-disabled students in a regular education class or a general education class. Must document and match the services page, we say. Okay, now I will point you to page 58 of the IEP guidance document. The IEP guidance document very clearly has how what you're documenting is how much they're going to be without their non-disabled peers. How much are they going to be out of the regular ed classroom? What classes are they getting in the regular ed classroom? What content areas? You got to document those content areas, where they're getting those content areas. And then we look to the services page after we see that statement. And we don't use things like as needed or maybe, or we're pulling out because of this, we're pulling out because of that on a non-consistent basis. We don't put that stuff in there. We put exactly what is happening for that student and what's documented in their service minutes. And we see this all the time. We have a problem. I see Brenda shaking her head, and she's perfectly okay to jump in here. But on the services page, we see under location that you're not including the content area that's being served. You're leaving out the implementer. But you're more times than not, the problem we see is that the location is being left out, and that we're not documenting the content areas. So if you've got co-teaching, and you know what content area is being provided through co-teaching. So we're looking at that, and then we're looking at the ARC considered potentially harmful effects on the placement. That's part of the conference summary. So we've jumped back from the IEP. As we're reviewing the record, we're looking at least restrictive environment statement. We're looking at the services page matches the statement in the LRE. And then we're looking to see if the placement decision matches, and does the potential for harmful effects been addressed. Now, it's perfectly okay to check the box on potential harmful effects if there's not going to be any potential harmful effects. But the more restricted, the more potential for harmful effects. So document the reasons why you must restrict the environment in 45C. What do the students have to have beyond supplementary aids and services to make progress in the regular classroom? Okay, so the reasons. What are the reasons? And that goes back to that continuum of placement options. We're looking back on the conference summary that you included reasons why, even with the use of supplementary aids and services, the student can't get it done in the regular classroom. They can't get it done in the regular classroom with co-teaching. They got to be in a resource room. What is it that's restricting that environment? What are the reasons that's causing that? And we've already talked about that at length, so I'm going to skip on through that. And then on 46A, we're looking at the anticipated frequency. So if you're following along with your IEP, you're looking at your you're looking at your IEP services page, okay? And you've got anticipated frequency of service. All right, how frequently is that going to occur? How much time is going to be used? Is it going to be daily for 60 minutes? And then what are the projected beginning and ending dates? And those match up. And then the anticipated locations. And I got location must include the content area, okay, in the annotation. Same thing for related services. If the related services occur, if you're getting speech and they're pulling out to the resource room, that should be listed up there in the LRE statement. And then you come down there and you say anticipated location, resource room, and he's getting speech, okay? Now, one anticipated location that can be different is the physical therapy. The IEP guidance document alludes to this. You can use school-wide as your location for physical therapy, because the feeling is, and the notion is that may occur all over the school, on the playground, on the steps, in the classroom, in the resource room. So you can put school-wide there. That's one thing you can do. But you can't do that for occupational therapy. You can only do that for physical therapy, okay? So then we look at these 48 and 49, and I always here's what I've got. This is the comments I put on every one that I reviewed. Progress monitoring is required for an ESY decision to be made with fidelity. If you don't have progress monitoring data, if you don't have frequency of data collection matching up, if you don't have the trend data, if you don't have some blurbs in your conference summary, if you don't have your present levels with progress data, if you don't have baselines, then you're not going to be able to make this ESY decision. The whole idea of the ESY decision is that around those breaks, when you take a 2-week break at Christmas, when you take a 6-week break in the summer or 8-week break in the summer, that you've taken data before that break occurs and you take data after that break occurs, you compare that progress data and you see if that student, after 6 weeks of being back in school, can they recoup to the same level of baseline or the same level of performance that they were able to before they left. If they can, they're not a candidate for ESY. This is something I would caution you about ESY. You can't just blanketly say, okay, everybody in FMD gets ESY. You can't do that. It's illegal, okay? It has to be individualized. It has to be based on recoupment and regression and the fact that you've got data to support those decisions. Okay. The ARC considers the concerns of the parent in the development of the IEP. If you've not heard about the Andrew case, I'm not going to go into that. We've talked about it, but it does impact the way we do things. And one of the things that come out of the Andrew case was that parents were not involved in the development of the IEP. How do we document that? We ask the parent open-ended questions. What do you think needs to be in the IEP? What do you think the student needs to be working on? And you capture that rich discussion in your conference summary. So vital. To providing FAPE, if you go to court, have you included the parent in the development? Or did you do your own draft and just say, here it is, sorry about your luck? I'm going to talk a little bit about transition, and this is as you note, you see things that are bold. There's probably a good reason to pay attention to the bold. And transition is indicator 13. Your directors have to report on this each year. They have to have 10% of their folders or 10 folders reviewed. And so it's very important that we get these things right, because you have to be 100%. The state wants the district to be 100%. They want to be 100% on all of these compliance issues. And so for students in the 8th grade or 14 or older, and we already talked about this a little bit up front, make sure to start this at age 13 if needed. So pay attention to your caseload, pay attention to your birth dates, pay attention to your annual review dates, and make sure. So one of the things I did this morning when I was reviewing a kid that was in the 8th grade, 14. Actually, the kid was actually in the 8th grade and they were 15. And so I was looking to see, are they going to turn 16 before the annual review? And they were not. They were not. So that would be an instance where you wouldn't get caught. But if that student's birthday had not been in February, at the end of February, and this meeting, the annual review was at the beginning of February, let's say that birthday had been in January. At that point, you'd be responsible for all the items under the 16 age group. And so you could get caught with a desk review at that point. If KDE pulls your files and you haven't taken care of that stuff, then you're going to be in a world of hurt. So make sure that we look at age 13 here. For students in the 8th grade or 14 or older, the student has a multi-year course of study needed to assist the student in reaching post-secondary goals. So no use of the word elective. In the file I reviewed this morning, I used elective at the senior year. So I just made a little note. Don't do that. All right. So you fill out all that. And then multi-year means at minimum from the current year to the student's expected year of high school. Make sure to check that the MyCOS was completed to the exit year. So we're looking at that multi-year course study. That multi-year course of study is included in your IEP. If you're following along with your IEP, you're also looking at the conference summary report to see that in order to be in compliance, you got to discuss this in your conference summary. And that's where we fall off the page lots of times. You'll have it in your IEP, but it's not in your conference summary. Okay? So yes, no, maybe. It's a no if you have not documented your discussion in the conference summary. And that is a must for compliance. All right, then you get down to 51A through 51I. And this section for students who are 16 years of age or older, ARCs may use student profiles from statewide testing. And let me say this. If you get a desk review and you have to send in documentation, they're going to ask you for an ILP. So you better make sure that you've got an ILP. Now there's a great page that Damien Sweeney done on KD's website around ILP and requirements for the ILP and requirements for transition. In regards to that, every 6th grader and above is supposed to have an ILP in the state of Kentucky. So they're going to ask you for that. So make sure that you're alluding to that ILP is, you're providing the assessments within that ILP, and you're using that information that comes from that ILP to inform the goals, because that should be developing the preferences and the interests, the careers that interest me, the things that the student, how they best learn, their learning styles, and it may also identify some gaps and barriers. Now, when we're writing the IEP, it includes appropriate, measurable post-secondary goals aligned to other available student information, such as present levels, student interest or preferences, training and education required, employment's required, when appropriate, independent living skills is required. And I say in my documentation there, or my annotation, I say independent living may be needed for an MMD student as well as FMD students. It's not just for FMD students. If you've got some independent living skills that are deficient for those students that are low functioning MMD students, then you may need to shore that up with a goal that includes independent living. One of the things that I would say that we see that where we make mistakes is we forget to say, what type of certificate they're going for in regards to training and education, where they're going to be doing that specifically, and then also the specific job that the student, and if we were doing transition training, I'd show you some examples and non-examples, but we don't have time for that right now. But I can say that lots of times people will say something like this. They'll say the student is going to get a certificate or an associate's degree at Big Sandy, and they've got that piece okay. And then they go over there and they say, to get a job in the retail industry, we want a specific job right there. So that would be a no-no. 51B, the IEP includes transition services that are needed to assist the student in reaching post-secondary goals. If you're looking on your IEP, there's a place for transition services, okay? One of the services that must be there is the initiation of the multi-year course of study, and who's responsible for initiating that. That's the school district, right? So you would have that, always have that in there, all right? And there's other transition services that there's all kinds, and in our full-blown transition training, we would go into what those things are. But when we're reviewing a file, we're looking to see, hey, is the multi-year course of study there? Do we have some other transition services? Are we doing community experiences? What are some of the linkages we're making for outside agencies? Those types of things. What are the services that are needed to help this student reach their post-secondary goal? We have this question all the time in transition training. This student wants to be something that they're not capable of maybe attaining. Keep in mind, it's a goal. We still have to write goals for those low incidence students. We still have to come up with, and we have those examples embedded in our transition training. You still have to, the requirement is for all students to have a post-secondary goal that includes training and education, requirement of an employment, and then when appropriate, independent living. And then we have to have chosen services that are going to make a robust plan for that student to reach that goal.
And it must be realistic though.
It must be a realistic goal, yes. And so you sometimes you act as that counselor, and you have those conversations, you build that relationship, and you have those conversations. Hey, I want to be a vet. Well, what have you thought about maybe being a vet tech? And you keep them in the ballpark, you keep them in the interest range, but you come with something that's a little more realistic for that student. 51D or 51C, for transition services likely to be provided or paid for by another agency, the other agency is invited to send a representative. The LEA, Local Education Agency, should invite when appropriate or document why it's not appropriate to do so within the conference summary. Now, as an LEA, we should be inviting them at a certain point. At some point, we should invite them. They don't have to show up, and we don't have to have an excusal letter if they don't show up. They're not part of that properly constituted ARC. They're an outside agency, and they're on your ARC notice. They're separated. We're talking about people like Voc Rehab and your community college disability coordinators, things of that nature. If you invite them by documentation on ARC notice, verify that a form exists. So we're looking for that consent to invite the outside agency form if you've invited them. And did you invite them prior to sending the notice out? Okay. We always say, as a good rule of thumb, look at the top of your ARC notice. Compare that date to the date in which you got consent for that outside agency invitation. So we would want you to date that 1 day prior. Best practice? Yes. We don't want a lawyer to say, you generated that thing at the same time, you sent that out by email, you got email tracking, and all of a sudden you've got a problem. Okay. So it's just safe to say we're going to do that one day before we send that ARC notice that includes that invitation to that outside agency. Okay. And we look at the top left-hand corner of the notice and we compare the date on the prior written consent. Update and gain consent for the 18-year-old. So you have to do that. You also have to do a notice every time you have a meeting and you invite that outside agency. You have to do a new notice per that letter to Gray, 2007 letter to Gray. OSEP sent out a letter and it says you must have a new invitation each time. So if you invite voc rehab junior year and then you turn around and invite them senior year, it's a good likelihood you're going to have to do an update for the 18-year-old as well as a new notice or a new consent from the parent at that point. Or if they're 18, you would have to get consent from the student and not have to have it from the parent. So must have a new updated consent for each ARC that you invite the outside agency. As a transition service, the student has a multi-year course of study. So we're looking at that again. And so, you know, we're looking to see that make sure not to use the word elective in your multi-year course of study. Fill out to the year of exit. The course codes have to be there for alternate assessment folk on your multi-year course of study. Multi-year means at a minimum from the current year to the student's expected year of exit. The student's multi-year course of study must be in alignment with the ILP. There you go. And a discussion of the review of the student's multi-year course of study must be documented in the conference summary. I would say we fall off the page right here with documentation in the conference summary. Always document that.
No, it's very hard to align it sometimes with the ILP, and sometimes I don't align it necessarily with the ILP, but to the student survey, and I document it in the conference summary because it may pull in a brain surgeon and going to attend Yale. Well, as we all know, that's not very realistic. So we kind of have that discussion and say, even though it says in the ILP, this is what the student chooses to do. We've talked about it, and this is why we developed that.
Well, and then
is that going to be in compliance status, even though it's not in line with the ILP? I'll justify why.
Well, you're going to allude to that ILP. You'll just make a statement in your conference summary saying you included the ILP in the development.
Right. Okay.
And whatever information you glean from that ILP, you know, that ILP can be robust and have a lot of assessments. And if you look at that ILP, you look at that ILP that Damian Sweeney references on KDE's website, it has a playbook attached with it, and it's got a ton of assessments. And then we also in our I'll show you real quick. In our copy of the coaching tool, we put in and I'm thinking it's right here at the bottom of this. We got consideration for developing transition statements and present level, but on down the page we have somewhere in here where we've listed a website. It's the South Bend website, and it has all the transition assessments. So the whole idea, and I'm not finding it right now, and I probably need to move on. So I'll go back to where we were. But there's tons of transition assessments right there at your fingertips that you can make your own. These transition assessments need to be done yearly, and we need to be updating our present levels with information that comes from the ILP and from those transition assessments. So 51F, annual goal, that's a good point, though, that you made, Brandon, in that sometimes those unrealistic things are revealed, and then we have to turn that into a statement in a conference summary and explain it. So very, very, very good point. Annual goals included in the IEP are related to the transition services needs. Education, training, employment must be checked. So what we're talking about here is if you're looking at your IEP, you're looking at your goals, and right under your goals are some check boxes. One says education training. The other one says employment. And then the other one says independent living. If you only have one goal, you have to mark, at minimum, you have to mark education training and employment. But if you have several goals, you need to make those goals specific to each one. So if you got 3 goals, you could mark 1 for education training and 1 for employment, and then maybe 1 for education and training again, or 1 for independent living. So, but if you only have 1 goal, the guidance document says clearly that you can mark all of those areas under that 1 goal. Here, 51G, measurable post-secondary goals are based on age-appropriate transition assessment. Assessments may include these things. It gives you a laundry list here of things that you can allude to that's going to give you information. The record includes documentation that age-appropriate transition assessment data were used to provide information on the student's needs, strengths, preferences, and interests regarding each post-secondary goal. Present levels must include updated age-appropriate assessments. Info that reveals the preferences and interests, learning style, vocational aptitude, and identified barriers should be identified and addressed by transition services. Go back to those exemplars that I showed you earlier. And we're looking here at, we've marked transition, we've marked instruction, we've marked employment. Those are the, and you must at age 16 mark at least one of these, or at age 14 you must mark one of these, and you must address it with present level documentation about what barriers exist in instruction, what barriers exist in employment, what are the experiences that this student needs. So we're looking at, when you develop that present level under transition, you got to have strengths identified, needs identified, age appropriate transition assessment data, and performance evaluation data, as well as an adverse effects statement that goes under all of that. And if not, you'll be cited by KDE. So it's very important that you understand that if you mark instruction, and I like the way they do this on the next page down. See how they have instruction in bold, and they're talking all about instruction, and they're including the baseline information, where it came from. They're including the adverse effects statement. They got it marked in color. They're talking about his deficits in computation and how that's going to impact his post-secondary goal attainment. Okay, what are we going to do for him? And then employment, what does he need? What are the barriers that are identified? What's the baseline in social emotional status? If that's a major impactor. Does he need self-advocacy skills to be included? So very important information. And this all goes into, and we kind of look backwards a little bit when we review a file for present level transition, and we see, did you copy and paste that old one into that new one? And if you did, you're non-compliant. And let me tell you where you're non-compliant. You're non-compliant when we get over here to this 51I. Was the measurable post-secondary goals updated annually? You cannot answer that question yes if you have a present level that's been the same since 7th grade and the kid's in the 11th grade. You've got to have new data. You've got to address new things, instruction, employment, community service, or community experiences, I should say, not community service, but community experience, whatever it is that the student needs to overcome those identified barriers that come up. You have to identify those and you have to address those. So got a little bit ahead of myself, but just make sure that the record includes documentation that age-appropriate transition assessment data were used to provide information on the student's needs, preferences, and interests, and that we've addressed any barriers that may arise from that documentation or from that data. 51H, the student is invited to the ARC meeting. Look at the notice and look at the conference summary. It has to be documented in the conference summary every time. The discussion needs to be rich, and it needs to be a back and forth, how we include that student's interests and preferences, and were they invited on that notice. We're looking at the ARC notice. We're looking at the signature page. They were invited, they signed, we included the discussion, multi-year course study, all those transition assessment updates, all that guidance that we need to be giving them. The measurable post-secondary goal are updated annually. So we're looking to see that there's a current IEP, that the transition present levels are updated, and there's no copy and paste. Ask if is the goal still appropriate? So what you're saying there, is the goal still appropriate after we do all these assessments, after we run the student through the instruction, after we run the student through all the experiences that are in the plan. Are there still does the goal still remain appropriate, or do we need to tweak it? Do we need to change it? If the goal remains appropriate, we can keep it the same and document as such. All right. 52 A and B kind of go along with some things that you'll find on the IEP. At least 1 year prior to the student reaching the age of majority, which is 18 in Kentucky, the IEP includes a statement that the student and the parent have been informed that the student's rights will transfer to the student unless they need to go and into the court and have some litigation in regards to emancipated youth. So sometimes, you have an FMD student that's not going to be able to take care of themselves, and the parent has to go to court in order to retain those rights and to make those decisions. And you have to inform them that those are going, 1 year in advance of 18. You have to inform and you have to document. There's a place on the IEP where you document and you date it. The conference summary report includes documentation of prior notice for the student if graduated from high school with a regular diploma. Okay, so you document that in the conference summary at least a year ahead of time. For students graduating or aging out, documentation shows the student was provided a summary of performance of academic achievement, functional performance, and includes the recommendations on how to assist the student in meeting their post-secondary goals. So see summary of performance requirements in the IEP guidance document. Things like transcript, IEP documents from voc rehab, a recap of the academic functional performance, information on linkages that may assist the student in successful transition are to be included. And that's just a quick list of things that can be included there. If you do that at the end of the year, the question came up last time, do you do that in an ARC meeting? I would say yes, that you probably need to do that in ARC meetings because you got minutes, you got proof that it happened, and you need to give that student all that information so they can move on to the next phase. Questions, concerns, comments? All right, so now we're looking at evaluation timelines, and this gets into indicator state performance plan, SPP indicator 11, another federal indicator. Okay, and we're talking about initial referrals right now. We're talking about initial placement. We're talking about initial evaluation. Okay, so we're looking at the consent for evaluation form. If we're following along, we would look to see, is this student actually placed within the timeline that they're supposed to be placed within. It's 60 school days from the time you get consent from that parent to start that evaluation. You have to have the IEP in place, the eligibility meeting held, and all that kind of good stuff. Well, I should say at least you got to have the eligibility meeting held.
Let me ask a question. I don't mean to interrupt by any means, but also I know you may get to this, but whenever it's a reevaluation and you suspect a new disability or an additional disability, for example, if they're placed LD only in writing, but you think they're all areas, you suspect that, or you suspect MMD and they're LD, does that timeline still apply?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. So they have to be tested and placed within 60 days of that.
That's correct, right, Brenda? You're doing a new eligibility for a new area. The thing that comes up all the time, Brandon, is do you have to do RTI? And the question is definitively, RTI should be going on all the time. And you're not just doing RTI for eligibility. You're doing RTI because all students get RTI. They're either in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and those tiers are ongoing. And if they're getting tier 3, they're also getting tier 2. And if they're placed eligible in writing, but they're not eligible in reading, they should be getting tier 3 intervention in reading if they're down in reading, that kind of thing. So, Brenda, you want to say something?
Yeah, you just now said that, and that was good. But also, Brandon, when you're filling out that reevaluation form and you click SLD, it will also ask you the areas that you think the child is SLD in, and you put that in there. So, but Denny Paul answered the question earlier.
Now, you typically do not have, it wouldn't be an initial.
No. Now, I'm wondering if that 60-day timeline still applies. Like once we obtain consent for that new evaluation, and it's a different area, do we have 60 days to have?
You know what? I said yes right away, but I don't know. I think if you're doing that as part of a reevaluation, you only have to have that reevaluation done by that 3 years. So let me circle the wagons on that. I jumped the gun, I think, a little bit on that. I don't think that the 60-day timeline applies there. Now, some states, you can read this in federal law and things. There'll be some other states that'll have other guidelines. They'll say 65 days, and you got 30 days to get the IEP done and this kind of thing. We do have 30 days to develop the IEP once we make the eligibility decision and put it in place. But that's only on an initial. And when you're doing a reevaluation, 60-day timelines are out.
That's what I thought.
Yes, 60-day timelines are out, and you're only going to be tied to that reevaluation date. And so if you're going to add an area, you need to have it within that reevaluation date, that 365 days times 3.
That's what I thought. That's what I want to make sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like I said, I jumped the gun there a little bit and said 60. That is not correct. I made a mistake.
That's what I thought. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So we're looking here then on 54 for students initially referred during the current reporting school year. The ARC completed the evaluation within 60 school days from the receipt. That's for initials. That's 60 school days. We would have to have a calendar, and we would have to see the days that you were in session, and we would have to know all that information, date of consent, and then we'd compare that. And then they'll allow you to, if beyond timeline, indicate number of school days. So if you were 62 days, we'd put 62 days, and then we would say why. There's some reasons why. There's a drop-down box, and you can enter those reasons. Parent didn't produce the child for evaluation, that kind of thing. Within the 60 school day period, an LEA shall ensure that the ARC meeting to develop an IEP for a student is conducted within 30 days of the determination of that student is eligible. So now, let me say that. Within the 60-day school period, so you don't have 60 days to get the eligibility and then 30 more days to get the IEP. That 30 days is included within that 60 days. So make sure you know that. And we're looking to see the date of the eligibility meeting and the date of the IEP development. And typically, districts do that in the same meeting. And that's perfectly okay to do that and have those dates be the same. And that would be a yes there. Okay. Now, on the reevaluation, the ARC conduct a reevaluation in the current reporting year within the 3 calendar years from the date of the last eligibility ARC meeting. So what I do is I go back and I look for that. If they're doing an evaluation in 21 and they find that kid eligible 3/25/21, I'm looking back to see if that meeting was held 3 years, I'll look back to 2018 and see when that was held. And if it was held before that 3 years runs out, then it's compliant. If it's beyond that 3 years, if they held that meeting, they found that student eligible on 3/25, and the last time they found that student eligible in 18 was 3/18, they're beyond timeline. You see what I'm saying? So it's 3 years, it's 3 calendar years, and you can't go beyond that. 36 months or 3 years. And then there's a question, is the IEP in effect at the beginning of the school year? Mark NA for a student not eligible at the beginning of the school year. So if it's an initial one that you're reviewing, you would mark NA. If they found that kid eligible in December and started that, it wasn't in effect. But if it was in effect at the beginning of the school year, you'd mark it as such. So this all has to do with documentation around progress data that must be attached that includes evidence of delivery of research-based interventions. This all has to look at the RTI data, I'm saying, on the annotation. And so 58A says the ARC reviewed a referral for a multidisciplinary evaluation, and they included documentation of instruction and intervention prior to conducting a full and individual evaluation. Documentation shows prior to or as part of the referral process, the student was provided appropriate, relevant, research-based instruction and intervention services. The instruction and interventions were delivered in the regular ed setting, and they were delivered by qualified personnel. Now, when we say qualified personnel, we ask the question, did it occur prior to the referral to special ed? And when we talk about qualified personnel, we're talking about people that have certification. Okay. So in the last training, we talked about instructional assistants doing RTI, and that is not by law the way it's supposed to be done. According to this guidance document, instruction and interventions are delivered by qualified personnel, and that does not include instructional assistants. Documentation 58B shows prior to or as part of the referral process, proper amount of data points to make a call on lack of progress. Do we have database documentation of repeated assessments of achievement and behavior? Is there enough time that has enough water gone under the bridge? And is there enough time? Do you have enough data points to say that the student is trending away from making progress? You collect them at reasonable intervals, and you provide those results to the parent. 59, the ARC identified a suspected disability and planned an evaluation as documented on consent to evaluate form. So we always want to identify the suspected disability and document that in the conference summary. And then we want to have that evaluation planning form and that consent to evaluation form prior to any kind of testing that we were going to do. A review and analysis of the referral information occurred, and the information was sufficient to support a suspected disability, and the assessment components necessary to assess the student were documented. On 60, the ARC conducted a full and individual evaluation in all areas related to suspected disability. For a review of data for a reevaluation, mark yes if the ARC documented a full review and analysis of the existing data. So you'd have to have something to go by there in order to mark that yes for a review of records. The ARC used a variety of assessment tools and procedures to determine if a student has a disability and to determine an appropriate educational program. Now, what they're talking about here is you can't use one source of information to find a student eligible. You can't get an ADHD determination from a doctor and put a kid in other health impairment without doing a full evaluation. Okay, I know that sounds silly, but you can't do it. You can't do it. You can't do it with an autism documentation either. You have to go and do the evaluation and do the appropriate triangulation of data that's going to say, yes, the student needs special design instruction. Yes, the student has an adverse effect on their performance. And yes, they have a documented disability. And it meets the criteria under one of those 14 disability categories in the state of Kentucky.
And that medical evidence could be one piece of the triangulated data.
Exactly. Exactly. And it is one piece, and you can't find a kid eligible for an IEP in the state of Kentucky based on one document or one test. So be careful about that. And then for a full review of data, mark yes if the ARC documented a full review. So I think I already said that. The ARC provided and administered the assessment in the native language and mode of communication appropriate for the student, or documentation exists that it was clearly not feasible. So you got to document that if you can't do it in their native language. That's why you couldn't do it. The ARC considered evaluation information provided by the parent. The ARC included a discussion of current classroom-based local or state assessments, classroom observations, and observations from teachers and related service providers. If a full record review is completed, did the ARC document the completion of behavior observations? They are still required. Get on down here to the last page. We're looking at the referral form. We're looking at database documentation of repeated assessments, conference summary, consent to evaluate. We're looking at the psychological report, the classroom's observation, social developmental history, adaptive behavior assessment, and or rating scales. And so we're looking to see that they conducted a full and individual evaluation prior to implementing special education services. I will say this, you only have to sign consent for services one time as a parent. You don't have to sign it every time you reevaluate. You only have to do that one time, and it's not retroactively revoked. So they can't come back on you and say, we didn't want all that stuff, we're going to sue you. If they've given you consent and that consent stays good, they don't revoke that consent. Anything you did was fine. So if the ARC determines additional data is not needed for a reevaluation, the ARC documents the review of existing data, including these things. So you can't just not do anything. You have to review the existing data. Evaluations, information provided by the parents, if available. You have to at least consider them. Minimum of 2 classroom-based informal observations by the ARC members required for record reviews. 1 or more of the following. Current classroom-based assessment data. You got to look at progress data when you're reestablishing eligibility. If you're not going to do a full-blown evaluation, you got to look at local assessment data, state assessment data. 1 of the following you have to include there as a way of saying the student still presents as a person with needs for special design instruction and presents as a student with a disability and eligibility. 66B notifies parents of the reasons the ARC is not conducting a reevaluation and informs parents of their right to request an assessment. That's really the end of the record review document itself. We use eligibility forms to document eligibility. We note that to be eligible, you must meet the criteria of one of the 14 disability categories, need special design instruction, and be able to show how the disability creates an adverse effect on academic and functional performance, or have an adverse effect on educational performance that results from the disability, however you want to state that. So that is the record review document itself. That is the training, and that's the way we go about reviewing files. We've tried to highlight for you, tried to have you present with a file so that you could compare and contrast the things that we're saying. You'd have something to look at, and this work session then provides you with the latest information that we have, as well as some of those documents that we developed that we feel really good about, like our coaching tool, which is here, and this is readily available for anyone that wants it. It is a working document. It's one that we're going to review often, and we're going to inform this with our impressions from CAPS. And so that is the training in a nutshell. If you have questions, please put them in the chat or speak up and talk to us and let us know what questions you may have. Just want to thank you from the KVEX staff. We're here for you to provide resources, and want to thank Dion Bates and Brenda Combs and all the staff for their contributions to this training. I also want to thank each of you for being here today with us.